The silence in Sullivan County was absolute, until it wasn't. In February 2020, authorities realized 15-month-old Evelyn Mae Boswell had vanished, not hours ago, but 2 full months prior. While a community scrambled through the Tennessee brush, the mother, Megan Boswell, sat in an interrogation room, spinning a web of contradictions so dense it felt physical. She spoke of kidnappings, secret handoffs, and silver BMWs, all while the truth lay chillingly close to home. This is the story of a search for a ghost, and the mother who manufactured the haunting. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Sullivan County, Tennessee is a place defined by its contrasts. It's nestled in the northeastern corner of the state, where the Appalachian foothills roll into horizons of deep green and smoky blue. To a passerby, the towns of Blountville and Kingsport feel like the quintessential American heartland. Church steeples, local diners, and the quiet dignity of a region built on manufacturing and retail. But beneath that scenic veneer, the county grappled with the same quiet desperation seen across much of rural America. In the years leading up to the tragedy, the median individual income sat at just over $33,000, and for many families, the line between stability and crisis was thinner than a mountain mist. This was the world that shaped Megan Boswell. Born around the turn of the millennium, Megan's early years were not a story of stability. She was the product of a family dynamic that law enforcement would later describe as toxic and fractured. Her mother, Angela Boswell, would eventually stand before a judge and admit that she had failed her daughter in every way that mattered. Angela was a woman whose own life was a map of legal troubles and personal failures, leaving little room for the nurturing Megan needed. In the courtrooms of Sullivan County, the history of the Boswell home was laid bare, a cycle of neglect that seemed to pass from one generation to the next, like an inheritance. By the time Megan was 17, she was a ghost in the system. Her social worker, Gail Kite, would later describe the girl she met during those years as a teenager who was not just neglected, but actively traumatized. Megan arrived in the system malnourished and terrified, carrying the heavy weight of past abuse that no child should ever have to understand. She was a girl who had spent time in foster care, adrift in a world that hadn't provided her with a single solid anchor. Yet, even in the midst of that chaos, there were flashes of a different future. While in foster care, Megan managed to earn her high school diploma, and for a brief moment, it seemed like she might break the cycle that had defined her mother's life. Then came the pregnancy. In late 2018, 17-year-old Megan was preparing to bring a new life into her already cluttered world. The father was Ethan Perry, a young man who would eventually join the army and find himself stationed far away in Louisiana. At the time, those close to Megan said she seemed genuinely excited. There was a hope, perhaps a naive one, that a child would provide the purpose and unconditional love she had missed throughout her own upbringing. On November 21st, 2018, Evelyn Mae Boswell was born. She was a bright-eyed baby, a tiny spark of light in a family that had known far too much darkness. But the reality of motherhood in Sullivan County was a far cry from the trial visits Megan had experienced during her time in the system. The infrastructure of her life was built on sand. She didn't have a home of her own. Instead, she and the infant were part of a nomadic existence, shifting between the homes of relatives, temporary motels, and the crowded spaces shared with her mother, Angela. The relationship between mother and daughter remained a powder keg. Angela later testified that she hadn't been a good role model, and the friction between them grew as Megan struggled with the demands of a toddler while trying to navigate her own late adolescence. There were warning signs, though they were easily missed in a region where families often move in the shadows of the economy. Megan began skipping pediatrician appointments. The excited mother who had once talked about a fresh start was being replaced by someone more guarded, someone who was learning that if you tell enough stories, you can hide the cracks in your life. Her father, Tommy Boswell Sr., would eventually recount how the lies started small before they became the very air Megan breathed. He described a daughter who didn't know how to tell the truth, a girl who had become a master at manipulation simply to survive the volatility of her own household. As 2019 drew to a close, the scenery of Sullivan County began to change. The lush greens of the Appalachians turned to the skeletal grays and browns of winter. Inside the various trailers and rooms where the Boswells stayed, the atmosphere was growing cold in a different way. The bond between Megan and the world around her was fraying. People stopped seeing Evelyn. They didn't ask at first. Life is busy, and in Megan's world, people often came and went without much explanation. But the silence surrounding the 15-month-old girl was beginning to solidify into something heavy, something permanent. The stage was being set for a deception that would not just lie to a family, but to an entire state. The air in Blountville during those months carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a sensory backdrop to a life that was increasingly isolated. Megan was no longer the scared girl her social worker remembered. She was evolving. To those she met in passing, she appeared like any other young mother, perhaps a bit overwhelmed, perhaps a bit distant. But behind her eyes, a strategic engine was running. She was learning to compartmentalize her reality, separating the child who needed her from the life she wanted to lead. A life free from the suffocating weight of responsibility. In the small, cramped spaces of their temporary dwellings, the presence of Evelyn May was becoming an inconvenience to the narrative Megan was building for herself. The endless lies weren't just a habit, they were a fortress, and inside that fortress, the fate of a 15-month-old was already being sealed by the very person who was supposed to be her protector. If Megan Boswell was the architect of a fractured reality, the ground she built it on was the Muddy Creek property in Blountville, a landscape defined by deferred maintenance and family secrets. Dominating this space was a brown shed, a former playhouse where the echoes of childhood laughter had long since been replaced by a grim, utilitarian silence. This was the family's home base, but it lacked the permanence the name implied. As Megan shifted between trailers and the homes of various boyfriends, the instability became a constant weight on her child. Her father, Tommy Boswell Sr., watched as his daughter's life became a series of escalating deceptions, once describing her as a master manipulator who could no longer distinguish her fabrications from the truth. He later testified about the friction that defined their cohabitation, specifically how a simple disagreement over a messy bedroom could escalate into a conflict so sharp it forced Megan to move out. It wasn't just typical teenage rebellion, it was the visible fraying of a support system that Evelyn May was supposed to depend on. The shadow of Angela Boswell loomed over every room. Her criminal record wasn't just a list of mistakes, it was a way of life that Megan observed from the front row. In early 2020, even as the search for Evelyn was beginning to reach a fever pitch, Angela was being arrested alongside her boyfriend, William McLeod, in Tannersville, Virginia, for their involvement in an aggravated burglary and the theft of a gray BMW. This environment was one where legal authorities were seen as adversaries rather than protectors. Angela's admission that she witnessed and participated in drug use, opiates specifically, within the home, provided the gritty context for Megan's own developmental trajectory. There were no guardrails in this family, only the chaotic momentum of people trying to outrun their own reputations. Angela later admitted to the court that she had been a hollow role model, failing her daughter in the most fundamental ways imaginable. She acknowledged that the tumultuous household, filled with arguments and fighting, was the only world Megan ever really knew. Into this vacuum of stability stepped Ethan Perry. For a long time, he was the man Megan pointed to as the father, the soldier stationed at an army base in Louisiana who was supposedly caring for the child. But as investigators began to pull at the threads of Megan's story, the image of the military father began to dissolve. Ethan cooperated fully, providing a stark contrast to the Boswell family's defensive posture, and the truth was eventually laid bare. It was determined that Perry was not Evelyn's biological father at all. The relationship had been a series of arguments about paternity and threats, a toxic connection that left Megan feeling worn out and ready for someone else to step up. She portrayed herself as a mother under siege, yet those who caught a glimpse of life inside her world saw a far more disturbing reality. Visitors to the home didn't see the perfect mother Megan tried to project online. They saw a 15-month-old girl living in squalor. A babysitter named Sue later described the visceral experience of caring for Evelyn, how the child often smelled so strongly of urine that she had to be immediately bathed and scrubbed clean just to make the air in the room breathable. Other friends recalled eating out with Megan and the baby, noting that the stench coming from Evelyn was detectable from across the table, a silent plea for care that was being ignored. Even Megan's own descriptions of her daughter were laced with a strange detached hostility. She reportedly called the toddler mean as Shotty to acquaintances, painting a picture of a child who was more of a burden than a blessing. The neglect was sensory. It wasn't just the memory box filled with baby bottles found in the white shed. It was the way Evelyn existed in the minds of those who saw her. To Megan's friend Caitlin Carter, the toddler was a source of embarrassment, a child so physically neglected that her presence was marked by a lingering smell that ruined a simple meal out. To Erica Stacy, the mother of another of Megan's romantic interests, the child was an obstacle, a complication that kept Megan from fully immersing herself in her new life with a man named Hunter Woods. While Megan and Hunter were posing for photos at an aquarium in 2019, Evelyn was being treated as a secondary character in a story that Megan was rewriting daily. The chaos of the Boswell family wasn't an accident. It was a cultivated atmosphere of dysfunction where a 15-month-old girl was slowly becoming invisible, hidden behind a mountain of unpaid debts, stolen cars, and the persistent, nauseating smell of urine that no one seemed bothered enough to wash away. December in Sullivan County isn't the glistening postcard winter of the North. It's a season of damp, bone-chilling gray. The vibrant oranges and reds of the Appalachian autumn had long since rotted into a slick, brown sludge on the forest floor by 2019. In the small wood-heated trailers and drafty homes of Blountville, families were huddling toward the holidays, hanging string lights and planning meals. But for 15-month-old Evelyn Mae Boswell, the light was about to go out. The second week of December marked the transition from a child's existence to a ghost's legend, a transition orchestrated by the mother who had already begun to treat her daughter as a footnote in a new, more exciting story. The last verified sighting of Evelyn Mae occurred around December 10th or 11th. At that point, the toddler was still alive, still breathing the cold Tennessee air. She was seen by a babysitter, a woman who remembered the child's bright eyes and the persistent, neglected state of her clothes. But after that day, the physical presence of Evelyn evaporated from the public eye. She didn't just disappear, she was systematically erased. As the calendar turned toward Christmas, Megan Boswell didn't show the signs of a mother whose child had been snatched or lost. There was no frantic pacing, no tearful phone calls to the sheriff's office, no desperate posts on community Facebook pages. Instead, Megan leaned into the silence. She occupied herself with the mundane details of a young woman's social life, flirting, posting, and searching for the next spark of validation. While the rest of the world was wrapping gifts, Megan was wrapping herself in a new romance. She had started seeing a man named Hunter Woods, and to those who watched her during those weeks, she seemed lighter, almost unburdened. She spent her days and nights at his place, or driving around the county, playing the role of the carefree girlfriend. When friends or family members asked where the baby was, Megan had an answer ready for every occasion, a different answer for every person. To some, she said Evelyn was with her biological father, Ethan Perry. To others, she claimed the child was staying with her grandmother, Angela. She spoke with such casual confidence that no one thought to double-check. In a family culture where people frequently drifted in and out of each other's lives, the baby is with a relative excuse was the ultimate conversation stopper. The psychological chilling of Megan Boswell was most evident on social media. While Evelyn was missing, or perhaps already dead, Megan was active on TikTok and Facebook. She posted videos of herself smiling, lip-syncing to songs about heartbreak and resilience, and posing for selfies that emphasized her dark hair and wide, practiced smile. There is a specific kind of horror in seeing those timestamps, realizing that while a toddler's life had been cut short, her mother was meticulously choosing filters for a video. She even took a trip to an aquarium in Gatlinburg with Hunter during this period. They walked through the glass tunnels, watching sharks and rays glide overhead in the blue water, while back in Sullivan County, the real world was becoming increasingly cold and final. Witnesses later remembered that she didn't seem distracted or mourning. She seemed like a girl on a first date, eager to please and entirely present in the moment. The Christmas of 2019 passed in Sullivan County without a single present for Evelyn May. There was no tree with her name under it, no photos of her opening a toy, no holiday meal where she sat in a high chair. Megan's father, Tommy Sr., later recalled the hollowness of that season. He had seen Megan, but he hadn't seen his granddaughter. He had asked about her, but the answers remained vague. Evelyn was taken care of, or she was at the other house. The family dynamic, already strained by decades of conflict and distrust, allowed this vacuum to exist. No one wanted to start a fight on Christmas Day. No one wanted to be the one to accuse Megan of lying when she looked them in the eye and promised the baby was safe. So the holiday lights twinkled in Blountville, and the town sang carols, while the silence surrounding the 15-month-old grew deeper and more suffocating. By the time New Year's Eve arrived, the silence of December had become a permanent fixture of the Boswell household. Megan had managed to go 20 days without her daughter, and the world hadn't ended. She had discovered that if you lie with enough conviction, people will eventually stop asking questions because the truth is too exhausting to pursue. She was living in a bubble of her own making, a world where Evelyn didn't need to be fed or changed or comforted. She told Hunter Woods that she was embroiled in a messy custody battle to explain the child's absence, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive ex-husband and a broken legal system. It was a brilliant, tactical move. It turned her child's disappearance into a source of sympathy for her new boyfriend. But beneath the surface of the social media posts and the aquarium dates, the physical reality was lurking. The brown shed on the Muddy Creek property sat in the winter dark, a silent witness to whatever had transpired in those middle weeks of December. The ground was hard, frozen solid by the Tennessee frosts. There were no search parties yet, no yellow tape. There was only the sound of the wind whipping through the bare branches of the trees and the muffled sounds of the highway in the distance. Megan Boswell had successfully navigated the most difficult month of the year. She had survived the holidays without a child, and as far as she was concerned, she had gotten away with it. The transition was complete. Evelyn May Boswell was no longer a toddler requiring care. She had been relegated to a problem that Megan had solved through the sheer force of her own deception. As 2020 dawned, the residents of Sullivan County went back to work, unaware that they were living next to a ticking clock. The lies Megan had told in December were beginning to overlap and fray at the edges. You can only tell a grandfather his granddaughter is fine so many times before he demands to hear her voice. You can only tell a boyfriend about a custody battle for so long before he asks to see a lawyer's letter. The pressure was building, but Megan remained calm, almost eerily so. She had spent the last 30 days practicing her craft, refining her stories until they felt like skin. She was ready for January. She was ready for the questions. Or so she thought. In the shadows of the Appalachian foothills, the truth wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the thaw. The timeline of a typical missing persons case is measured in heartbeats, the frantic minutes after a child wanders away, or the agonizing hours when a teenager fails to return home by curfew. But in Sullivan County, the clock didn't start until the batteries were already dead. On February 18th, 2020, the Tennessee Department of Children's Services contacted the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office with a request that felt like a punch to the gut. They needed to conduct a welfare check on 15-month-old Evelyn May Boswell, a child who, by all accounts, had not been seen by anyone outside her immediate, secretive circle for nearly 2 months. It was a 57-day void that defied every protocol of modern law enforcement. The official report didn't come from Megan. It was triggered by other family members who could no longer stomach the shifting stories and the empty high chair. Tommy Boswell Sr. finally spoke to authorities, admitting that the last time he had laid eyes on his granddaughter was back in November or very early December. When the sheriff's office sat Megan down for the first of what would become dozens of interviews, she didn't react with the desperation of a grieving mother. She reacted with the calculation of a cornered animal. She told the investigators she had been under pressure and claimed that the child was safe, yet she was unable to provide a single address, a single phone number, or a single shred of physical proof that Evelyn was drawing breath. By the evening of February 19th, the Amber Alert was officially issued. It was a digital scream that echoed across every smartphone from Bristol to Memphis. The photo of Evelyn May, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a wide, innocent smile, became the most recognized face in the state. But as the public began to share the alert, the grim reality of the delay started to settle in like a cold fog over the Tennessee Valley. Most Amber Alerts are issued within hours of a disappearance. This one was issued while the child's trail was already 60 days cold. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, and the FBI joined the search, deploying agents to comb through the dense brush and rolling hills of Blountville. But they were searching for a needle in a haystack that had been scattered by 2 months of winter wind. The community's response was a tidal wave of localized fury and desperate hope. Hundreds of volunteers descended on the region, their boots caked in the orange clay mud of East Tennessee. They searched the edges of Boone Lake and the deep ravines near the Muddy Creek property. The air was filled with the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors and the baying of cadaver dogs. Yet, as the searchers tore through the woods, Megan Boswell was frequently spotted at local convenience stores and driving through town, seemingly detached from the chaos she had initiated. She told reporters that she knew exactly who had her daughter, but she claimed she couldn't say their names because she was scared for her life. It was a narrative designed to make her the protagonist of a thriller rather than the suspect in a tragedy. The frustration within the sheriff's office was palpable. Every time they chased a lead, it ended in a brick wall or a graveyard. Megan pointed them toward a silver BMW, claiming the child had been handed over to people in that car, leading to a multi-state search for a vehicle that may never have existed in the context of a kidnapping. She gave the names of people who were later found to be incarcerated or out of the state at the time of the alleged handoff. To the detectives, it felt like they were trying to build a bridge out of smoke. Every word Megan spoke required a 48-hour investigation to disprove, effectively stalling the search and wasting thousands of man-hours. Social media became a battlefield. The Justice for Evelyn groups swelled with thousands of members who analyzed every pixel of Megan's past TikToks and Facebook posts. Rumors swirled like a cyclone through the county. Stories of child trafficking, of secret adoptions, of family blood feuds. The local atmosphere shifted from communal grief to a paranoid, finger-pointing rage. People began to look at the Boswell family property on Muddy Creek Road with a sense of visceral dread. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a crime scene in waiting. As the first week of the Amber Alert drew to a close, the search efforts began to narrow. The TBI issued a statement expressing their deep frustration with the conflicting information provided by the mother. They weren't just searching for Evelyn. They were fighting a psychological war with Megan. The sensory experience of that week in Blountville was one of exhaustion. The smell of damp earth being overturned by shovels, the blinding glare of police floodlights at night, and the oppressive silence that followed every failed lead. The Amber Alert had come too late to prevent whatever had happened in December. And as the investigators looked back at the mother who had waited 2 months to report her child missing, they realized they weren't looking for a kidnapper. They were looking for a burial site. The paradox of the case sat heavy in the gut of every Sullivan County resident. How does a child vanish for 60 days in a world of constant connection? Megan Boswell had managed to keep the world at bay with a smile and a shrug until the weight of the lie became too great for the family to carry. And while the state of Tennessee prayed for a miracle, the veteran detectives on the case began to prepare for the inevitable. They knew that in the world of missing children, time is the only currency that matters, and Megan Boswell had spent every second they had. The interrogation room at the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office was a sterile, windowless box that smelled of industrial floor wax and the low-voltage hum of fluorescent lights. Inside, Megan Boswell sat with a composure that chilled the veteran investigators across the table. For most parents, the realization that their child had been missing for weeks would be a catalyst for a psychological collapse. For Megan, it was a stage. Over the next several days, she would construct what the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation eventually categorized as 19 different versions of the truth, a labyrinth of deceit designed to lead law enforcement into a multi-state wilderness of dead ends and red herrings. The first lie was perhaps the most tactical. Megan told the detectives that she had handed Evelyn over to a woman in a silver BMW in the parking lot of a local Piggly Wiggly. She provided a vivid description of the transaction, claiming the woman was part of a safe house network meant to protect the child from the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. This lie was calculated. It capitalized on the deep-seated distrust of government agencies common in rural Appalachia and gave the police a tangible, moving target. Sullivan County deputies and TBI agents spent hundreds of man-hours scouring surveillance footage from every gas station and grocery store in the Tri-Cities area. They looked for a silver BMW that never appeared. They looked for a woman who didn't exist. When the BMW story began to fray under the weight of digital evidence, Megan didn't retract it. She simply layered a new fiction on top. She shifted the focus to her mother, Angela Boswell. She told the investigators that her mother had taken the child to a remote cabin in Virginia, claiming that Angela was the true architect of the disappearance. This sent authorities across the state line into the rugged terrain of Scott County and beyond. At the time, Angela was already a person of interest in a vehicle theft, which made the lie plausible enough to waste another 48 hours of critical search time. While the police were knocking on doors in the Virginia mountains, Megan was back in Sullivan County, calmly asking for updates on the search she was actively sabotaging. The 19 Shades of Deceit weren't just random fabrications, they were defensive maneuvers. Every time a detective pointed out a flaw in her logic, like the fact that the person she claimed had the child was actually in jail, Megan would pause, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for the next chapter. She told one officer that a man she met online had snatched the child during a secret meeting. Then, she claimed Evelyn had been taken by a family friend whose name she suddenly couldn't remember. She even attempted to paint a picture of a sophisticated kidnapping ring, suggesting she was being blackmailed by powerful people. The lead investigators, including Sheriff Jeff Cassidy, later remarked that interviewing Megan was like trying to walk through a swamp. Every step forward only led to sinking deeper into her manufactured reality. The most manipulative of her lies involved a claim of pregnancy. During her initial period of detention for false reporting, Megan told jailers and investigators that she was 7 weeks pregnant. It was a transparent attempt to garner sympathy and perhaps secure a lower bond or better treatment within the facility. She leaned into the role, describing her symptoms and expressing concern for her unborn child, while the state was still trying to find her actual, living 15-month-old daughter. A subsequent medical examination proved she was lying, but for a period of several days, the media and the public were forced to grapple with the image of a pregnant mother under siege, exactly as Megan intended. One of the most physically exhausting red herrings came when Megan claimed she would lead police to a specific location in a local park where the child was being kept. She spoke of a hidden path and a specific landmark. The authorities, desperate for any breakthrough, mobilized a massive contingent of officers and search dogs. They followed her directions through the damp, cold Tennessee woods, only to find that the landmark was a generic tree and the path led to a dead end. She stood there, wrapped in a police-issued jacket, looking at the frustrated searchers with a blank expression, eventually claiming she must have confused the locations because of the stress. It was a calculated display of power. She was showing the authorities that she, and she alone, controlled the tempo of the investigation. The TBI eventually issued a public statement that was uncharacteristically blunt. They told the citizens of Tennessee that every single lead provided by Megan Boswell had been disproven through forensic analysis and traditional detective work. The authorities were no longer just looking for a child. They were fighting a war of attrition against a pathological liar who viewed the search for her daughter as a game of chess. Each lie served to distance the investigators from the Muddy Creek property, the Brown shed, and the physical evidence that was slowly being recovered. The psychological toll on the investigators was immense. Sheriff Jeff Cassidy, a man who had seen decades of crime in Sullivan County, appeared at press conferences with a visible tremor of suppressed anger in his voice. He told the media that he was tired of being lied to. He was tired of the games. And he was tired of a mother who didn't care enough to tell the truth about where her baby was. The community's sympathy for Megan had long since evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp demand for justice. The mother of endless lies had successfully stalled the legal system for weeks, but the walls of her labyrinth were closing in. While she was busy weaving her 20th version of the truth, the forensic teams were heading back to the one place she had tried so hard to make them ignore: the family farm. The investigation into these 19 versions of the truth would eventually form the backbone of the prosecution's case. It proved premeditation, it proved a conscious effort to conceal a crime, and most importantly, it proved a total lack of remorse. Megan Boswell hadn't just lied to the police, she had lied to a grieving nation, using the image of her innocent daughter as a shield to protect herself from the inevitable. As the final weeks of February 2020 bled into March, the air in Sullivan County grew heavy with the realization that the lies were the only thing Megan had left. The 19 shades of deceit had finally run their course, and the truth was about to be unearthed from the red Tennessee clay. On March 6, 2020, the search of the Muddy Creek property reached its grim conclusion. In the shadows of that brown shed, the same structure Megan had once played in as a child, investigators uncovered a plastic trash can. Inside, they found the remains of Evelyn May, wrapped in trash bags and discarded amidst the clutter of the family's past. The forensic reality shattered Megan's remaining facade. She later attempted to claim the death was a tragic accident during sleep, but her actions, the 2-month silence, and the burial in a shed, spoke of a far more sinister intent. In February 2023, the legal system delivered its final word. Megan Boswell was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her daughter. The woman who had manufactured 19 shades of deceit was finally cornered by the truth. As she was led away in shackles, the endless lies finally stopped. But for the people of Sullivan County, the silence of Evelyn May would echo forever. Sullivan County still carries the weight of those 2 months, a period where a child was missing and nobody noticed. The brown shed on Muddy Creek Road stands as a grim monument to maternal betrayal, a place where the endless lies finally met their end. Megan Boswell will grow old in a cell, but no amount of time can restore the life of a 15-month-old girl tossed away like trash. The search is over, the trial is finished, but in the quiet of Blountville, the name Evelyn May still echoes, a whisper of what should have been. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.